Hey guys, this is Scott Garrison, and today I will be bringing to you the first episode of a new podcast. This is Image Watch. I will be covering Image comics from the inception in the early 90s up till current day. So with that being said, let's get started. And today I will be covering the first book to grace the Image universe. This is from April of 1992. We're talking about Rob Liefeld's Youngblood. So stay tuned, and we go from there. Like I said, this is the first book that covered under the Image banner and the Image logo, and today I will be covering the first 4 issues. Now, the story itself is an interesting premise. It's a group of superheroes that work under the government to essentially just be supporters. Like, this is the problem we have here, we need you to go take care of it. And there's an interesting show that's going on right now that has that similar kind of premise. You're probably familiar with it. It's Amazon's The Boys, kind of a similar concept. Group of superheroes, works for a government and a corporation. For me, I can kind of, I'd say, I have not, first up, I gotta premise this by saying, I have nothing against Rob Liefeld or any of the people that made the book. This is all just my opinion and my thoughts on what go on at the time, and either a critique, I give critiques and positives of the book, and it's all just my opinion and nothing against the creators. So that being said, let's get on the way. The team has a rather interesting lineup, and sometimes depending on what book you read, the team fluctuates. It starts off with their leader, Shaft. He's kind of like, comparing to other superheroes, he's kind of like Hawkeye, if you will. He's an archer, if you will. They have a Russian gymnast. Her name is Vogue. She's kind of like Black Widow. Die Hard. He's a cyborg, but you hear much more about him a little bit as the story progresses. He's kind of like Captain America. Chapel. He's kind of like the Punisher, but he also served in Vietnam with another team. I believe that's another Image book for its own time. And there's also someone called there's also Badrock, whose original name was actually Bedrock, but because of some legal issues with Hanna-Barbera and the Flintstones at the time, they had to change his name. So Rob went with Badrock. Issue 1 is a flip book. It deals with the home team, which is Shaft and his team, and also on the flip side is the away team, which deals with threats outside of the United States. They are led by Sentinel. And from the pages of the Youngblood series, it spun off into its own series, Team Youngblood, but that is a video for another time. Just giving a little bit of preface here. Issue 2 has the preview first appearance of Shadowhawk, which will be giving its own dedicated episode. Issue 3 deals with the debut of Supreme, which ended up getting its own comic. You see, the Youngblood really launched an entire genre, different series, different characters spun out of Liefeld's book. Youngblood was essentially the catalyst, if you will. The launching point for other characters, other books. Characters get referenced in this book, get their own series, and vice versa. Prophet, he gets his own book series, and he spins out of issue 2. A lot happens in the book. Although I will say, apparently, one criticism that has been going on against Rob throughout the book is that apparently sometimes he can't draw feet. Depending on who you ask and depending on what issue, agree to disagree. Example I can think of where the sometimes you can be proven wrong, I'd probably look at would be issue 4. The page where, okay, scratch that, Liefeld cannot draw feet to save him. Wow, that is skinny. Okay, I stand corrected. What he's good at is drawing big, muscular guys, with apparently the running joke is lots and lots of pouches. I mean, like, ammunition, okay, but other than that, just why? So what are your thoughts on what you've read so far on the series?
Well, like you said before, the book is really, it serves more as a launching point than anything else. Not just for Image characters, but everything that Rob Liefeld wanted to do on his own, or even in other books. I think I'd read a piece about it, about the original series, that some of the ideas were kind of recycled from what he had wanted to do in a Teen Titans book, I think, for DC, that he never got a chance to create.
And you would say they you mentioned, of course, the Teen Titans book that I didn't want to do. So would you say that Youngblood would be his version of the Teen Titans? I mean, he created pretty much his own team book here. So would you say this is his version of the Teen Titans, except obviously they're all adults, pretty much?
Yeah. Other than Badrock, who is a teenager still, but I mean,
Right.
he brings in elements from all kinds of other characters, and they either turn out to be sort of unique, like Die Hard. I think is you could easily look at Die Hard as kind of recycling a bunch of maybe Captain America tropes and things like that, although he doesn't really fit that particular bill. But it is still interesting to see what that character does under Liefeld's book and in future books when he gets referenced. The same with Badrock. There's another series, an independent series called Concrete, where a man gets turned into like this big, stone creature, and Badrock always reminded me of that. And he's another really interesting character that Liefeld creates, and he gets spun out into all kinds of other books. So it's a lot of fun to see where these characters began, and to get
And
to see where
Vogue,
a lot of them end up.
yeah, and Vogue, she gets her own miniseries. From my understanding, it was like 3 issues though, but that was about, and that was it too, because some of these characters spin out and get their own books. Die Hard, he has, again, some of this will be explained more in its own video, and I just want to focus on Youngblood, but just giving some context. But actually, it goes between Die Hard and Chapel, and it's an anthology series, Youngblood Strike File. It ran for. Anyway, it was a series that focused on giving individual characters the spotlight. And I know for a fact I've seen issue 1. It focuses on a story with Die Hard and goes there for an arc for a while, and eventually it goes a little bit more from there. But I want to save that for its own video. For this episode alone, I want to focus on Youngblood, and as the podcast goes on, I want to be able to expand more into the other Liefeld books.
Mm-hmm.
Just be able to keep some consistency here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, getting back to the first couple issues, like you said, the first issue is a flip book, and a lot of people might not understand what that is. A lot of comic readers will, but in this context, it's got 2 different stories, and you would read one story from the front cover until the middle, and then you turn the book over and around and read from the back cover to the middle. So you had 2 stories, and they throw a lot of characters at you in this first issue. It's really hard to keep up, but you essentially get introduced to two different Youngblood teams: an away team that handles things across the world sometimes, and then a home team that stays mostly in the U.S.
What's your thoughts on the art style? Would you say, from what you've read, would you say the art style improves, or would you say it's kind of like remains consistent throughout the entire series? In your
It
opinion, anyway.
I think around issue 3, it starts to look a bit better. I mean, you love or hate Liefeld, he has his own style. Everybody
Yeah.
smiles with all of their teeth, and they have extra teeth. you know, the pouches, the armbands, the muscularity. It's all very hyper realized, and that lends itself sometimes to some good things. Like when you see Badrock or Bedrock in this original series throwing
Right.
ninjas around, um, it looks great, because he's a huge imposing figure, and that's what Liefeld is really excelling at. But then you also get
Large
these,
imposing figures,
yeah.
or just big, big strong guys.
Well, I mean, it goes back and forth. I think he does better when there has to be less articulation in the body. But yeah,
Right.
almost everybody's a beefcake in this book, and it's a lot of fun, in that regard. If you can kind of just let go of some of the silliness, not every panel
Definitely.
looks bad. It's especially for the time, the art style was pretty good. Everybody was really digging Liefeld's stuff. He had done a lot with Marvel, especially, and so you
Yeah, I
get
want to
to
say you
see
guys
him.
start with shoot. It's like he did like an X-Men book, and then he went with Kate, and then yeah, I want to say it's like he is the one that created Cable,
Hmm.
correct? That's like what he's most well
Yeah,
known for.
I think Deadpool as well. I could be wrong with
Okay.
that, but I'm pretty sure he also. Yeah, he had a big falling out with Marvel because of these
Mhm.
characters that he created that he couldn't own because they were
Right.
in X Force or in X-Men books.
The reason why I asked that is because I'm going to be honest to both on air on here. I've not read any of Liefeld's work from Marvel. The only real
Uh-huh.
exposure I got from him is reading his Image work.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, it's sort of the same way with characters he created with Marvel. Deadpool took on a completely different. Um, I wouldn't say multifaceted, but he became a character beyond what Liefeld created originally, and that's because other creators who may or may not be more adept got a hold of him. And the same thing sort of happens with Youngblood too later on in some revived series where you see a little more depth to the characterization.
And preface this by saying the initial Youngblood run from when it started ran for 10 issues. And again, that's kind of why I went back to the focus saying is today we'll be covering the first four. And as soon as I've read the rest of the series, I'll make a follow-up video covering issues 5 through 10. So,
Yeah,
again,
and we're talking about I think in issue 2 we get Prophet
yeah.
pops in, and Prophet's an interesting character too, but not really necessarily one of the main Youngblood characters. He gets thrown in there, and it's sort of a launching point. He gets his own book, and it's kind of fun to see that character who ends up in a much larger series and then ends up in another revived series later on, interacting in this early format with these other characters. Um, it goes to show that Liefeld had a lot of creativity at the time, and
Mhm.
characters like Prophet, while they might have looked a little silly in hindsight, with these lots of pouches and hypermuscularity, it's
Right.
really interesting to know that they go so far beyond their original conception.
And that's also another thing that I was going through when you brought up issue 2. It talks about this initial scene here in the prologue where it talks about a team called the Berserkers.
Hmm.
Um, it's like that's also kind of another thing. They just like he just drops characters in,
Yeah.
and it's like here you go. It's like that's also another thing for me. It's like Rob Life to me. It sounds like Rob Liefeld was in this is like making a whole bunch of characters and just like okay, they're there, they're here.
They have pouches.
Yeah,
Yeah. He's
and
trying.
like
Excuse me. Kind of trying to see what
I
sticks,
guess it's
maybe.
kind of a thing in like hindsight. It's like, does some of these people like? I guess it's like, I'll kind of ask a question in hindsight. I know obviously the rest of the series might be able to. I might be able to understand more after doing the second video or covering the rest of the issues. But like some of these characters, like in hindsight, do some of these characters like the Berserkers? Do they go anywhere after their initial appearance from here? Like, do you ever see anything about them, or is it just kind of like a one-off thing? They're here, they're doing this thing, and that's it. Like, do you know anything?
I, the Berserkers, no, I'm not very familiar with anything they might have been in later on. They show up in this early series as kind of foils to this other character who's uh, his name is Darkthorn, and he's sort of like
Okay,
established as the big bad. You know, he's like Darkseid from DC
right.
or
He's their
maybe like
overall big villain,
Apocalypse.
and and it's like looking at a picture of him. You see him in issue 2. There is that dark side comparison. Just changes color a little bit, just changes
Yeah.
skin tone a little bit here, and you pretty much got their version of dark side. Although I will
Yeah.
say too, I do like this part. They give a nod to Jack Kirby in the
Hmm.
comics, but I mean he's like his own character though, so I thought that was kind of cool. And also, even though they couldn't talk about it like for licensing and legal points, but there's also even a reference. I want to say it's to either issue 3 or 4. They even bring a reference to Joe Shuster and Lois Lane and Clark Kent.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't catch that. Is that a? Oh, I think I know. Is it a pictorial reference to them?
Yes, I want to say I believe it's in issue 3.
Okay.
Um,
Okay. I think I see one where it's a yeah. There's a middle panel where there's a man who obviously looks a little like Clark Kent. Uh,
yeah,
you
and
know,
in
in the
issue
front.
3, it's them that guy there. That's supposed to be their pictorial version of Joe Shuster, the guy who created Superman.
Oh, okay. Interesting. I didn't catch that reference. That's cool.
Yeah,
Very
and
cool.
as I mentioned, the others they're supposed to be Lois and Clark. Kind of looks like Clark a little bit.
Yeah. 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 Definitely.
Obviously, they couldn't say their names or anything for obvious legal reasons or anything, but you kind of get the impression there.
Hmm.
And also
Yeah.
considering
Definitely.
in issue 3, it talks about at the bottom of the page says respectfully dedicated to the memory of Joe Shuster. So
Okay.
there you
Okay.
go.
Very good. Very good. And that that's another. I guess you could say that Liefeld's work is always an homage to what came before. He is very respectful of the history of comics, even if his art style might be very divisive.
And he's also a huge fan of comics, even still to this day. From my understanding, is he enjoys his work, but he also enjoys the medium of comic books in general.
Mhm.
He's a comics fan,
Yeah.
and he has been, from what I understood, and did some reading about him before prepping this episode. He was a fan of it ever since he was a kid.
Hmm. Well, getting back to kind of the premise of Youngblood, the international team, or they kind of work for the government, but they're also celebrities. Uh, they don't get to explore it in this early incarnation as well. I think later on kind of in reboots and rehashes of the characters. They talk about it more.
Mm.
But we only kind of get a hint of that. I think it's an issue. I think it's in issue 1 with
Yeah, a little bit.
Shaft.
It talks about, yeah, he's out with his girlfriend, and then he then some of them, like couple like background people, like couple people in the background. It says like, oh, it's Shaft, and they recognize him. News anchor talks to him.
Yeah,
Is overseas. He's like, is it true that their unit was sent overseas? Like, how'd you get here so fast? And it's like, we've been following you all day.
yeah,
And it's like they don't exactly have like you said, they're public celebrities basically, so they're not really gonna have much of a life. So, but yeah,
yeah.
like,
It's
or
cool
not
to
much of a
see that
social.
idea. To see that idea kind of realized here, and that'd be something I'd have to look into more. That what books might have explored this a little bit before.
Yeah, agreed here.
Um,
Same here. Like I said, it's like I want to cover more of Liefeld's work because he did so much with with characters, books, as I referenced as a shoot off of this, he launches another book that deals with the away team,
mhm.
Team Youngblood.
Yeah,
That'll get its own dedicated video. There he does so much with the stories with Die Hard and everything that came out of its own anthology series, Youngblood Strike File. That'll
mm,
get its own dedicated video. It was a series of one shots, but they were also flip books as well. One story dealt with Die Hard, another one dealt with another team member. I only found out about it because I saw a picture of it online doing some stuff
yeah.
for notes.
The uh, the whole celebrity issue though is funny, and you mentioned The Boys too. There's a couple other books, where they do that. I think later on in X Factor, X Force to some degree, and then later on in X Statics, which was another really good book. Um, was really heavily influenced, I think, by this early incarnation of a celebrity superhero team, and it's kind of a shame that the book gets overshadowed by all the kind of incomprehensible action that ends up taking stage because these early shots we get of the characters, like I think Chapel's a bit of a womanizer. Um,
Hmm.
you know, we have trying to see who, not they don't have a lot really going on. We get to see a little bit of it, when the team assembles essentially, and it would really have been nice to start by getting to know them rather than everybody's here, everybody has to get dropped into all the action. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I kind of agree with you there. It would have been nice to have gotten a little bit of background, a little bit more of a background piece for each character versus having them all dive in together. And that's also kind of another thing with the whole team building thing. There's something I noticed here when rereading issue 1. On the cover of issue 1, you see a guy standing next to between wrong way. Die Hard and Badrock. That is Combat from
Mm-hmm.
the away team. Uh, but yet, really, oddly enough, they referenced him in the lineup, a shot of the home team. Bad Rock, Combat, Chapel, Vogue, Die Hard, and Shaft. But the funny thing is, Combat was never in the was never in the home team. He was always with the away team.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I didn't catch that. Well,
Yeah.
that probably they were so strapped for space trying to launch these two teams at once that they had to throw them in somewhere.
Yeah.
Um, the that's another aspect too. That's when we talk about Liefeld throwing out all these characters at once. Not all of the names are bad,
Right.
but in Combat on the surface sort of seems like a silly name for a character until I think we get a couple issues later. Might be one, maybe just the next issue, but he's an alien from another world, and his actual name is Combat. It's just pronounced and spelled differently in the dialect of that species. I'm trying to find the reference to it here.
Yeah, and I get what you're saying. Issue 2 goes in. It's like you meet some more of his crew. You meet some more of his superiors and his other species, and some more of his species.
Yeah.
His commanding officer. Well, I'm assuming is his officer anyway, because they talk about him a great deal. So I figured, okay, that must be that. That must be who that is.
Yeah. But it kind of, it lets you know that on the surface we have these kind of silly names, and Shaft. He fires arrows, obviously.
Right.
Vogue, I think as a model and an acrobat, a spy. That's kind of an interesting name too. But Liefeld doesn't have the best naming, but it gets the job done, and there was a lot more thought put into it than originally people might see on the surface.
Right.
Especially like when we get to Prophet, he comes up. We'll have to delve into Prophet later, if we can, in another episode. But I
Right.
think he was supposed to have all these religious connotations, and he was supposed to be the harbinger of all this chaos and
And
things
yeah,
that were
it's
going to
also
happen.
a good thing as well, kind of going into that little side point there. It's like to me that I feel like the thing with Prophet is in one book they say he's one thing, and in another book it's like they forget and he's placed as something else. It's like there's no
Yeah,
like sometimes for me it's like there's no it feels like they don't have like character consistency. I don't know if it was just because of the time they couldn't like really saying, hey, this is what happened with the previous issue, so here's what happened here. And that's also another thing I understand doing some research about the especially the early Youngblood books. Apparently Rob Liefeld was known for at the time being like having his books be late or delayed or something. So with the printing of reading these dates on some of these books, apparently they actually came out later they than otherwise being like written on the inside the books.
hmm
Apparently.
yeah. Well, and it was probably a few things. It was Liefeld not being able to keep the book on schedule for whatever reason, whether it had to be art or scripting, lettering,
Right.
etc. And Image was a young company at the time, and so even in the big two, you still saw delays on books, and we
Right.
still see that. It's a less common thing nowadays with how distribution works in digital comics, because usually now if a book is delayed for a long time, there's something seriously wrong.
Right.
And
Either
then
they could some around the writing team or the artistry working out. They couldn't like
yeah,
really co-op because maybe some people are working on different books at the same time. Could be
exactly.
anything.
Yeah. And with the Image books, they're trying to work on their distribution, and a lot of books ended up being late. Yeah, I think we'd have to look at numbers, but when you look at Spawn and Savage Dragon, and even Shadowhawk, I think by the time those books really hit their stride, there wasn't a lot of delay. The
Right.
creators, they knew that it was their responsibility to the readership and to getting their work out there, to be on time and to have consistency in what the customers were getting. And I think that may be why Youngblood ultimately didn't reach the same heights as some of these other Image books, even though it was kind of the flagship starting point for so much of it.
And that's also kind of another thing. It's interesting as in reading the rest of the series, I found out like I kind of looked back at one of my own questions and I talked about like some of the books. And I understand the art looks like it's gotten a little bit better in the book. If you're holding on your hands, like the paper itself feels a lot different and the printing feels different because like the best thing I can think of it's like of course the artist changes like for issue 4 it's the inks were by Danny Miki and it's
Mhm.
like comparing the showing you guys some of the brief shots I did on like issue 1 and issue 2 the art is done a lot better
Oh yeah.
So I kind of answered a little bit my own questions. Like, did the art get a bit better as the books went on? My opinion, issue 4 looks the best. Like, the art
Yeah.
stands out more to me than the other ones, and also like the paper itself, whatever the book was printed on, the paper quality feels a lot better. Like issue 1, the paper's a lot more like, I don't know. It's like it feels like a lot thinner, like thinner or something. Best I can describe. I don't know how to properly describe it or anything, but it's like it feels different. But the art is also a lot better too. From having the book and reading it from me, the art here, the ink is by Danny Meeke. Then again, it's also back then, issue 1. Rob essentially did all the work himself. The plot, the pencils, the ink, that was all by him. Dialogue and color design were by other people. Versus as this, the later issues, it's creator, writer, and penciler. But the inks, he started getting. He got his company off the ground more, so he was able to get a lot more people involved, and so he was able to like, here, this is the jobs I need people to do. So
Yeah.
that way
Yeah,
it
definitely. And
lightens his work. It's like I would say it's like it would help him lighten his workload, so that way he's not doing so much
mhm.
outside of writing.
It improves our visuals of the characters too, I think, a lot. Um, those first couple issues are a little bit difficult to read, and they look more like '80s books than '90s books. Realistically, I mean, Liefeld's artwork is really very indicative of the '90s. I mean, it just his artwork is very '90s, but the way those books were produced with the coloring, the inking, and again, the paper quality was a big part of it. Very much like an '80s comic. Um, and then like you said, issue 4, and if when you read issue 5, you'll see the same thing. The art kind of remains the same. Liefeld was getting a little more comfortable drawing these characters. A lot of the pencils get better, although maybe the perspectives aren't as good, but the coloring, the inking, that all gets way better. It helps the characters become fully realized, and there's just a lot popping off of the page.
And also, I was kind of going back to waiting to go for till it goes somewhere else, but issue 4 at the end, that kind of segues into another what I comment about, like the amount of characters that he made. Um, issue 4 says to be concluded in Brigade issue 4, and see the issue letters page for details. That's also another thing. There was another book that was coming out at around the same time, not a little bit before. It was a 4-issue miniseries, and that was Brigade. But again, it's like a lot of some of these other books I want to give their own dedicated video, but several or some of Liefeld's books crossed over with each other. Considering initially when he started this, it was all for his. He pretty much wanted to make his own interconnected universe, but at the same time also acknowledging other Image characters. Whereas I'll be doing some episodes later on with like Savage Dragon, Spawn, and Shadowhawk. A couple of those characters you hear about references to. Oh, it's like they cited a group of Youngblood characters because originally when they first made all the Image issue 1s, Savage Dragon, Youngblood, Spawn, Shadowhawk, Youngblood, Wildcats, they all wanted to make it all interconnected. They wanted to make it their own universe, much like Marvel and the other big two, Marvel and DC.
That works a lot in varying ways. I think it's fun, especially when you look at and when we get to Shadowhawk. The number of characters that pop into the Shadowhawk book throughout its run are pretty amazing. And even Liefeld's other one of his other superheroes, Supreme. Supreme gets tons of cameos from different characters, and this is kind of a lot of fun for readers at the time. I was a kid at the time, and so I didn't get to pick up everything, but it was cool to read an issue of Supreme, and I think it's issue 2 if you ever check it out. But there's this great full page spread and
Issue
it's
two
Supreme.
of Supreme.
Yeah, issue 2 of Supreme, and
Okay.
you've got this full page spread, and it's all these different characters from Wildcats, Spawn, Shadowhawk, all these different characters in this full page spread, and it's Supreme kind of ruminating on the state of the world.
That
And
sounds like
that was
fun.
another,
Look for
yeah, it was
that.
pretty cool. But that's another great thing about what they wanted to do in early Image. Again, like you said, trying to make an interconnected universe, overstuffing it with lots of characters for sure, but giving them each their own place in this new world.
Obviously, the company still exists to this day, but they're publishing a lot of other books. But like, would you say maybe overall, with what they're trying to do at the time, would you say obviously several of the books have been rebooted and different series took off at the time with and whatnot, but would you say they were successful in that point, like what they're trying to do, like to make their own universe and characters and everything? Like, would you say that was a success for them, or was it just what they were trying to do, or do you think that was just something they were trying to do at the time?
I think early on it was a success. When you kind of look back at it, it's a mess. But at
Mm,
the time, I think what they were trying to do really did resonate with people, and whether or not that's the direction the company should have kept going is a little immaterial. You know, they took off, they got a market share, and then the company began to evolve. And you can look back at what was at the beginning and kind of ridicule it, but we wouldn't have the Image today without it. So I think that's
right.
important to remember. You know, they were
Because
very
obviously,
successful.
as it points is, the company still exists to this day, and they're still making comics. So they were obviously successful and popular enough to keep continuing and didn't just dry up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you still have, I think, just Spawn and Savage Dragon are
Yes, you
the
are
two
correct on that.
titles.
Those are the only
Yeah,
two original Image books from the time that are still being printed. In fact, it's like Spawn just passed like over 300 issues right now. Savage
yeah, they're
Dragon, from what I did
somewhere
some money
close to
right now, it's like
315.
caps at like 250 books on the Dragon right now.
Hmm.
I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah,
Again, it's like I'm gonna preface by saying it's like I want to get through all of those characters. So at some point, Savage Dragon will get his own a series. Spawn will get its own series. Although that's going to be a bit interesting because I've been trying to track down Spawn comics, and those are kind of expensive. I've seen issue
yeah.
one go for like $50. I've seen an issue one go for like 50 and up, and that's nuts.
Well, by now I think it's probably appropriate if you just want to read to grab a trade.
Yeah.
They've reprinted those first 10 to 12 issues, which are revolutionary. That's a great series. Um, they've reprinted those a few times, but and that's another reason why I think it's getting back to Youngblood. Um, it's unfortunate that this book didn't take off the way that Spawn and Savage Dragon did. I think it could have really changed how Liefeld's career trajectory went had this book attained that level of depth, even if it didn't go for 150 or 200 issues or whatever. But for it to get a couple dozen issues on an original run would have been really big, you know.
Hmm.
Um, so when we get
And
to
this
the
was the
second
only
half,
time that
sorry.
Youngblood went through a series. There was like you said, multiple runs and from different times. It was like late '90s. I want to say, in doing some research after doing this, it's like the most current one was from went up to like 2017. It had
Yeah.
like an 8 issue run. Again, I'll explain more on that when I track down the rest of the when I track down and read some stuff from that time period to see what things were like at that point. But it's like this has had a long history.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, I'm not at all trying to say that those other versions weren't worthwhile, or maybe most of them are probably better, honestly. But you know, it's just when we, yeah, right. When we look back at it, there was a lot of potential here, and I think we more or less get to scratch the surface of what Liefeld might have intended to start with. and that's fine. That's good. That it was just a jumping off point. So I think it's good to go back and reread these and see what they were like.
Oh, also in doing some, obviously you mentioned like the trade paperbacks, and when I briefly mentioned Spawn for wanted to do that for its own episode. Youngblood did actually have its own trade. It did collect like the whole 10 issue run, but fine. Um, they also released another one. It was a hardcover, but like the art style on issue 4, when they made that hardcover, they made the whole book, like the rest of all 10 issues, issue 1 moving forward, all of it had that same kind of art style, like Danny Miki's art style.
Oh,
It ran through that whole thing. It was like a hardcover something. It's like um I saw it online. I was like, that's kind of cool. But the guy wanted like a huge price tag for it. And it's like, yeah, it's like I've enjoyed his work, but I'm not shelling out like that much money for it. But it's the reprints are out there like this. It's like you can find these. You just have to either know where to look or how much money you want to spend.
yeah, that's right. Well, it'd be nice to experience them with better inking, but again, if you look back at it, it's dated, it's very aged, but again, it's a product of its time. So it's a time capsule in and of itself. It's interesting. You look at this very first Image launch book, and then everything that came after it. Yeah.
Well, we're not
How
knocking it
much?
too much. I mean, it was still fun
Yeah.
to read.
Oh yeah.
Any other thoughts or ideas you have
I think
at all?
we when we get to another section, we look at the second half of this original series, 5 through 10.
Right.
Might
Because
have
pretty much mostly
some.
cover because I pretty much mostly wanted to cover points like we talked about the art.
Yeah.
We gave some brief, though, our own opinions back and forth on the
Yeah.
characters. Um, the story. It's kind of an overall kind of like some hitting points that you talked about. Team comes together. Eventually, they come across this huge intergalactic. They meet this dark side rip-off
Yeah.
character. It's like he's their big bad, and just builds up to that point. Issue 4 ends with them seeing Darkseid, or their version of Darkseid, the Dark Thorn, I
Yeah.
believe
Dark
you said
Thorn.
it was.
That's right.
Yeah. And that's really where issue 4 ends, and it says to be concluded in Brigade issue 4, which again on itself was another flip book to Youngblood issue 5, and then it just goes from there.
Yeah.
Actually, looking at a lot of with the exception of issue 4, a lot of these other books were. It's like the first 3 issues were all flip books. Issue 2 had the Shadowhawk first appearance extra piece. Issue 3 had Supreme. 1 had the appearance of the away team. 4 was its own self-contained issue. Issue 5 was paired up with Brigade number 4, and goes from there. Anyway,
Yeah.
it'll be fun to read. It'll
Huh?
be fun to read the rest of this series just to see where it all goes from there.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Sorry to raid on your point on your moment. Was there anything like you wanted to say for closing thoughts?
It's a fun relic. It really it doesn't capture what Image has become at all. I think if you look at modern Image titles, there's very few,
If any,
yeah, if any,
superheroes.
superheroes. They're not quite what they used to be. And even when later on in comparison to other um, closer launch titles from the original creators, we look at some other superhero teams. Wetworks is one that stands out. Um, I think trying to think of a couple other ones that came along, but I don't know. I mean, it's the beginning, and we got to take it as such. And again, I don't think that Image would have been as successful had they not launched with a book like this, because it doesn't read well now, but then it was kind of a big deal, and it paved the way. So that's my final thought, I think.
Um, and I definitely see and agree with your points. As kind of even like I said at the beginning of the video, this is the book that launched the Image Comics brand, and like what you said during the video, Rob Liefeld's whole universe of characters. Some of these books, such as 2 and 3, were stepping stones for new characters and new stories. Issue 1 had the away team, Team Youngblood, a book that came out during the publishing of this run. That's probably why I imagined also whereas that was a delay with this book was because Rob was working on the others at the same time. Would I still obviously recommend reading it? Yeah, if pick up a trade, or if you're lucky enough to find these. I found these all in the back issue bins for $1, so they're out there. You just have to know where to look or what to look for. Other titles recommend reading. Youngblood Strike File gives you some backdrop information on other characters. Team Youngblood Strike File. Brigade, it deals with a couple characters they reference in this book and in Team Youngblood.
Mm-hmm.
And just other than that, just go out for yourselves and see what you like. That's just my thoughts on. That's just my picks, recommendations anyway. If you guys liked this podcast and you want to see many more, you simply search Comic Watch. We have a Facebook page up, so feel free to like that page. You can also find us on YouTube, where you can find this and many more. There's an X-Men, Mutant Watch, Valiant, Comic Watch, their mainstay show, and as well as many more. We are also on Spotify and iTunes and wherever many more podcasts can be found. So until then, we will see you guys next time with another episode of Image Watch. I'm Scott.
I'm Kaylee.
And we will see you guys again next time. Have a good rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where your time zone is. And we'll see you guys again next time. Peace.